Hello YouTube, my name is Paul, hope you're all keeping well. I thought it was about time I did my Ocean Software full set collection for the Commodore Amiga. So what my intention was initially was to get every single game that was released in the UK between 1988 and 1997. So I've achieved that with the recent addition of Space Gun. So yeah, so what I'll do is break it down by year. So I'll start off in 1988 and talk about the games from that particular year. And I'll just go through every year till we get to the very end. But what I'll do is I'll leave some timestamps below. So if you want to go to a specific year, probably your favourite year, then just click on that button. It saves you listening to me waffling on about the 70 to 80 games or whatever it is that Ocean released for the Commodore Amiga. So I've used the Hall of Light database as a guide to my collection, so if there's anything that I'm missing that isn't in the Hall of Light database as well, please let me know. But at the very end of the video I'll talk about some of the Imagine titles that were released on the Amiga, because obviously Imagine were associated with Ocean anyway, it's the same company. We'll just go through them. But yeah, what I'll do is go through the compilations first and then we'll crack on in 1988. See you in a bit. Right, let's check out some of these compilations then. Some are dire and some are really good. Some are really cheap and cheerful and some are really hard to get hold of. So we'll start off with the dire and the cheap. The first one then is Collected, Addicted to Fun Sports Collection. On it it's got World Cup Italian 90, which was dreadful, Run the Gauntlet, which worked particularly much better, and Pro Tennis Tour, which is probably the strongest game on the actual compilation. This won't set you back much, you can probably pick it up for a couple of quid. That's the first one. The second one then is The Dream Team, which consists of The Simpsons, Bart vs the Worlds, WrestleMania and Terminator 2. So again, nothing special. You can see why I'm not overly fussed about collecting a lot of these. And a lot of these games already have. All three of those did come out under the Ocean label. Again, not a particularly expensive one. Next up, Too Hot to Handle. Yeah, I was going to say Too Cold to Hold. There we go. Golden Axe, not a bad game. Total Recall, Shadow Warriors, and Ivan Iron Man Stewart Super Off-Road, which is probably the strongest game on this compilation. I probably only have about 60% of all the compilations that were released by Ocean, and a lot of those were released in France. Next up is Addicted to Fun Ninja Collection, which consists of Double Dragon, Shadow Warriors and Dragon Ninja. Two of those beat 'em ups are flipping dreadful. Again, not an overly expensive and not an overly difficult one to get hold of. Next up is called Super Fighter. Only one Ocean game on this one. You've got Final Fight, WrestleMania and Pit Fighter. None of those games are particularly any good. Again, quite a reasonably priced compilation to get hold of. Right, next up is probably the best compilation. Well, for me personally, it's got some of my favourite Amiga titles of all time. New Zealand Story, Rainbow Islands and Bubble Bobble. Quite a desirable compilation. Again, not overly difficult to get. It can have its moments and can fetch over about 20 quid. But again, two of those games are on the Ocean label. Next up is a compilation called Precious Metal. Arkanoid Revenge of Doe, Captain Blood, Crazy Cars and Xenon. It's not a bad compilation. Again, nothing particularly stands out there. Probably an easier way of getting hold of Arkanoid Revenge of Doe, because the standalone Imagine title is quite hard to get hold of. Next up is probably the most nostalgic of all these. I never had it back in the day, but when I started buying games again in 1994, before it's called a collection or anything like that, I bought this. And it had games on it which sort of stemmed back from an era which was very nostalgic for me. It's called the Hollywood Collection. Batman the Movie, RoboCop, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade and Ghostbusters. Again, quite a relatively cheap compilation, as most compilations are, but one of the better ones in my opinion. Now the last one, well, the last one that was bought from the UK is probably one of the best ones actually. It's called Power Up. It consists of Altered Beast, Rainbow Islands, X-Out, Turrican and Chase HQ. So yeah, fantastic compilation this one. Doesn't come up very often, that one as well, and it can probably fetch 20 quid, probably based on the fact that Turrican's on it, and Cross Out. The next three I acquired from continental Europe, the first one from France. I'm pretty sure there's only 3 of these as well. I've only got part 3. I'm not going to pronounce it because I couldn't pronounce that in a million bloody years. It's got Shadow Warriors, Batman the Movie and RoboCop 2. This one's probably fetched me back about 20 quid, but it's not easy to find. It's more common on the Atari ST of all machines. Right, next up, another quite obscure title. It's called Party Time. Looks like it says Volume 1 or something. I can't really see that, but it's Party Time. You've seen the story, beach volley, which is quite difficult in itself to get hold of, Run the Gauntlet, and Altered Beast. This one set me back about 20 quid and does not come up very often whatsoever. And last but not least is one game that, or one compilation that is not on the Hall of Light. I was quite fortunate to pick this one up from the Netherlands. It's called Burnout. So again, the games on here aren't particularly great. Batman and Cape Crusade is probably the strongest. The other three are not particularly, well, not particularly fun, are they? But yeah, this one is one I would not let go of out of all of those. So it's a really difficult to get hold of compilation. That's it, that's all I got. Like I said, I've only got about 60% of all the compilations that were released. I've got a couple that are missing, which would have had UK releases. All the rest are continental. So in 1988 then, Ocean Software decided to start publishing games for the 16-bit home computers here in the UK, the Atari ST and the Commodore Amiga. And the first game they decided to release was the exclusive for the 16-bit systems. In fact, it was an original game, not an arcade conversion or a movie tie-in. And that game is called Eco. A pretty bizarre game. You have to defend the ecosystem by killing things like bugs, and the graphics were all like vector graphics or wireframe graphics, and it received some quite decent reviews. It's not a collector's piece or nothing, it doesn't come up very often, but because it's quite an odd game, it's not really that desirable. I better pick it up for like 10 quid or something. The next up is a more familiar game. It's a game that came out on the Commodore 64 and was developed by Sensible Software, and that's Whizball. A game I never had back in the day, to be honest, and I'm not really that keen on it. From what I remember, you had to bounce a ball out of the screen, bounce it off of objects, or I think you had to pick stuff up along the way as well, but I can't remember, to be honest. It's not a particularly rare game, but it's more desirable than Eco. That might probably fetch about 10, 15, 20 quid. Now, the next game I'm really familiar with because I absolutely loved it on my Sinclair Spectrum, and the Spectrum conversion was very, very good. The Amiga version looked the part and sounded the part until it moved. That's Operation Wolf, one of these new style longer boxes, which is really nice. I thought this was much better than those plastic cases, but again was quite hard if I remember rightly. Again, comes up quite frequently, but don't really command a lot of money, to be honest. The next one is more difficult. It took me a while to get this one. Another Spectrum game I had back in the day, and I remember playing this one quite a bit, but it wasn't as good as the original release of it. That's Daley Thompson's Olympic Challenge. You had to bloody get the Lucozade bottle right to the brim so you can perform better in the races, but by the time you'd done that kind of training session, you were knackered. When it come to the actual race, you just couldn't bloody do it. This one come with quite a lot of bump in it, like posters and all the rest of it. But like I said, it don't come up very often, but again, it's relatively cheap considering how difficult it is to get. It's not a particularly good game. Now the next game is brutal. Again, another Spectrum game I had. I can get to the last level, but bloody hell was it painful getting there. And that's Platoon. But yeah, not a bad game, it's just flipping hard, to be honest with you. Again, comes with things like a cassette, Smokey Robinson cassette, and stuff like a poster. Yeah, this one is complete. Again, quite obscure, don't come up very often, but again, doesn't command a high price. It's quite a relatively cheap game to get. Now, the final game in 1988 is probably the best. It was developed by Special Effects. And that game is yet again in a different style box. It's Batman the Caped Crusader, which was a bit like an arcade adventure. I did like it until I went outside the Batcave, and I found it quite difficult. But yeah, you have to pick objects up to get other objects to work. That's that sort of game. It wasn't a bad game. Comes with a big poster and a floppy disk, and nothing special. But it was the first game in this style box, and this style box Ocean used now for the next couple of years. So bring on 1989. So yeah, 1989 then was one of those years that was really, really nostalgic, and I look back, well, really fondly. I got an Atari ST that year and I played a lot of these games on that system, so a lot of them are very familiar because the Amiga versions of those games were very similar albeit of a different soundtrack and a few more colours chucked in, but generally they're quite similar. First game I'm going to show you then is Rambo 3, which never got a full price release in the UK, but it did in North America under the Taito label. The first game is Rambo 3 in all its hit squad glory. Get one of those film tie-ins which was like multi-part. The first bit was trying to get out of faults using objects to sort of progress, and the last level, from what I remember, was a bit like an Operation Wolf style game. It was actually very good. The levels in between I can't really remember. Got a really nice soundtrack from what I remember as well. Now, next one, Beach Volley, is quite desirable and quite difficult to get, and probably would fetch anything between about £30 and £40 nowadays. Again, developed by Ocean France, who were really unlucky with their unreleased games throughout their sort of Ocean software history. Quite funny as well, because there's a bit of nipple in that one, which they tended to do quite a lot. Cheeky little sods. But yeah, if you play this game, you'll see a young lady sort of lying there at the back of the court. You would never realise she was even there unless you were looking for it. No, I wasn't looking for it. I found out some years later via a magazine. But yeah, how cheeky is that? But again, a very desirable game to pick up. Next up is a game I had back in the day and I absolutely loved it on my ST, and probably one of my favourite platform games of all time, and that's Rainbow Islands. This is one of the variants. The original variant I had, which I think was the first variant that was released, was the one that had sort of graphic there, but without the border. So it's literally the whole front of the actual box was nice and colourful. Again, a cracking game, highly desirable. Game can fetch £20–30 nowadays and doesn't come up as often as you might think. Now, from one of the better games to one of the worst games, and that's Red Heat. Again, another game I had on my Spectrum. Had some fantastic graphics, but the gameplay was bloody bad. Not really much else I can say about it. Again, doesn't come up that often, but not a very desirable title. Another arcade conversion. Again, 1989 was full of Taito arcade conversions. Operation Thunderbolt, which was miles better than Operation Wolf. Really good graphics, a game I could complete on the ST, but for some reason the Amiga version is rock hard. Again, doesn't fetch much, £5 if you're lucky. Next one, very similar again, another Taito release, that's Chase HQ. For me, a bit of a disappointment, which I'll explain in a bit, but the game itself features some quite small sprites. The music on the Amiga is really good, a bit like the arcade. Wasn't particularly fast and didn't feel like the arcade cabinet, which was a shame really, because it was probably the most hyped game for me for that year. Now, another disappointment, another game I had on the Spectrum was Robocop. Now, when I first got it on the ST, which is identical to the Amiga version, I was disappointed because that fantastic tune that existed on the Spectrum version didn't exist on the 16-bit machines. The graphics weren't that great either, and didn't kind of resemble the arcade. Well, it did resemble the arcade, but didn't have any of the arcade's atmosphere, I suppose. Again, another game that probably cost about £10. Very, very common based on the fact it sold tens, if not hundreds of thousands of units on the Amiga. Next up is Run the Gauntlet. Bit of a TV tie-in based on a program of the same name. Not a game I particularly remember that well. Not a great game, to be honest. Again, maybe a £5 to pick that one up. Doesn't come up very often. And probably one of the most obscure titles that were released in 1989 is Nightbreed, the action game. A game I've never played, to be honest, but it doesn't come up very often. I can't imagine it sold particularly well. It was based on a movie which I think cost a hell of a lot of money for its day. Probably one of the most expensive movies ever made. I've never seen it come up as an auction to get an idea of what it's worth. As the next game is Nightbreed, the interactive movie. A bit more common. I'm pretty sure this game was given away as some part of Amiga bundle when you bought a Commodore Amiga 500. But again, doesn't fetch a lot of money and it's quite obscure, don't come up that often either. And next game, there's actually a European variant of this Cabal, which I never had back in the day, but I really did want it. Quite desirable, probably fetched about £30 nowadays, but in Germany it was released under the Imagine label, which again is quite difficult to get. In fact, that's quite difficult to get as well. But it's a bit like an Operation Wolf style game. This one was quite interesting because you could shoot the buildings, so they actually collapsed. It's the first time I've ever seen that in a game. But yeah, a really good game. Not a game I spent a lot of time on, but one I certainly wanted back in the day. Right, next up is another one of those unusual Ocean original releases, because like I said, Ocean didn't really release many original games, and that's Voyager. The first time I ever heard of Voyager was on an Ace cover tape when they actually had a soundtrack, which I think was written by Rob Hubbard. It was very famous on the Commodore 64. It's quite a good little tune actually. Again, vector graphics. No, it's not vector graphics, it's actually filled in graphics. Not played it much, to be honest. I'm not really sure what it's like. But this one here, again, about £5. Now this game here now, I couldn't wait for this to come out. So Chase HQ and Batman the Movie were two games I really couldn't wait to be released. Now what was great about Batman the Movie was the driving sequence. And the driving sequence, from what I can gather, was developed by the same team that brought us Chase HQ on Spectrum. So why the hell didn't they bloody bring us Chase HQ on the 16-bit systems? But I think the guys behind this also worked on Chase HQ on the Spectrum, and the driving sequence on the 16 bits was absolutely incredible, and that's exactly how Chase HQ should have been. Again, doesn't fetch a lot of money, £10, but yeah, definitely recommend picking that one up. The platforming sequences aren't great, but the driving sequences are really good. Now, along with Rainbow Islands, this is probably one of my favourite Ocean games of that year. That's the New Zealand story. I just picked up my Atari ST. This is one of the games I had for it, and it was absolutely incredible. The Amiga version is superior in sound and is smoother. That's about it. The gameplay's pretty equal, to be honest. Again, quite desirable, can fetch about £20, but I've not seen one listed for quite some time. But a cracking game, certainly highly recommended. And the final game is another movie tie-in. A game that I remember really well because I played the game then watched the film. And that's the Untouchables, which got some really good reviews. And if you notice, the old Ocean logo went a bit orange there, because kind of to commemorate Batman the Movie, I think, but for quite a few months after that they kept using the orange logo, gold logo I should say. Again, another multi-part game which was really good fun and really sort of tied in really well with the film. So that's the end of 1989. Let's move on. So during 1990 then, Ocean Software still had their partnership with Taito, and a lot of arcade conversions were filtering through. The first one I got is probably again one of my favourite Ocean releases, and that's Pang. A game I'm not particularly great at, but it looks the part. It's probably the closest home computer version to the arcade. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm not particularly great at it, and again developed by Ocean France. That one there is very desirable and probably one of the more expensive Ocean titles to pick up. I've seen it go for over £100 these days. Can go for less, just depends if you're lucky. Now, the next one is the sequel to probably one of the most successful Ocean games of all time. That's RoboCop 2. A brutally hard game, no matter what system you play it on, and the Amiga version is no exception. I cannot get off the first flaming level. Graphics are completely different to the Atari ST, which was one of the first games I remember seeing where Ocean actually done that, and a divergence between the two systems you would not believe, because before that most games were quite similar. This one had the most difference in the graphics. In fact, Pang was quite a bit different to the ST version. So it's good that Ocean Software will recognise the fact the Amiga was more superior and deserved better games. Now next up is another one of those original titles. I'm not sure if this was actually a spiritual sequel to Carrier Command. That's Battle Command. Again, not an overly desirable game. Doesn't come up very often. It's quite obscure. But yeah, it doesn't fetch a lot of money on the Amiga. A bit like RoboCop 2. Again, that's what, £5–10. Now next one's a really good arcade conversion. Come out, yeah, middle of 1990. That's Midnight Resistance. Again, I played the SD version. The Amiga version looks identical, but it scrolls. Whereas us ST owners back then had the flip screen effect going on, so it did play as well. But a fantastic conversion nonetheless. Received some really good reviews. Again, quite desirable and probably can fetch about £20. Right, next up is a game I'm not really familiar with, and I touched on it in my 11 unreleased Ocean games. Well, I touched on a game that should have been similar to this, which was Adidas Championship Football. That's Adidas Championship Tiebreak. Again, quite an obscure title, not that desirable, but like I said, I've never really played it before, to be honest. Next up is a film tie-in. Massive film when it came out. Again, one of those really expensive films. And Ocean seemed to get those sorts of tie-ins, didn't they? That's Total Recall. And not really played this one very much, to be honest. Looks okay. Got a good David Whittaker soundtrack, but I've got no experience of it, and it doesn't fetch a lot of money either, probably a £5. It's amazing how many Ocean games aren't really worth a lot of money. Now, this was probably my favourite flight sim on the ST, and it's a fantastic flight sim as well on the Amiga, and that's F-29 Retaliator. Again, its sequel TFX was never released, but I found this game really good fun, believe it or not, for a flight sim, because they can be quite in depth, which puts you off, but this was quite arcadey. Again, not highly desirable and doesn't really fetch much money. Next up is another Taito arcade conversion, that's Pusnik. Not really spent much time on this one. I think you just have to match up the different blocks, but again, not really spent much time playing it. Doesn't come up very often, quite obscure, but again, it's not that desirable. It's amazing, Ocean Software did produce quite a lot of really good games, but not a lot of them are really, well, not a lot of collectors really want them, to be honest. Ivanhoe is another obscure title, again Ocean France. Not a particularly great game. And the Amiga version, because it's only set, I think there's one disc less than the ST version. It's only on one disc, the ST is on 2 discs. Because of that, a bit like Batman the movie, it lost all those kind of in-between level sequences. Now, I'm not sure if you played both versions of Ivanhoe or Batman the movie, but you'll notice the ST version does have those quite nice sequences, which do add a nice touch to the game. Next up is Narc. Again, an arcade conversion. One I've not really played, to be honest. Didn't really appeal to me. By this stage, I think I'd sold my Atari ST and I had a Mega Drive, so for the next 18 months I never really played much in the way of Ocean games. Another arcade conversion, Plotting. Not a bad arcade conversion either. Again, another puzzler. Was quite obscure, but again, not that desirable. Now, this was a follow-up to one of the biggest hits of 1989, and that's Chase HQ Special Criminal Investigations. I don't think this one was particularly much better, to be honest. It played quicker, looked more like the arcade, but again it was quite slow paced. Did kind of miss the atmosphere of the arcade machine. And one of the better Ocean Software original developments is Lost Patrol. Again, I never really played it, to be honest, but I remember it getting some really good reviews in the magazines. But yeah, I'm not really sure what it's all about. It's quite unusual. It's probably one of the only few games I'm not really sure what it's about. But again, quite desirable. Can fetch about 10-15 quid, which is quite desirable for an Ocean game anyway. Another really good arcade version is Sly Spy Secret Agent. One of the last games I ever played on my Atari ST before I sold it. And the Amiga version again had far more superior graphics. But again, for some reason, Ocean games on the Amiga were harder than their ST counterparts. That's quite desirable. Again, sort of a £15-20 game. And a final game from 1990 is Shadow Warriors. Again, very similar to Midnight Resistance in the fact that the Amiga version scrolled and the ST version suffered with flip screen. But I found the graphics again fantastic. I just found the actual game mechanics weren't particularly great. But a really good achievement, and again got some really good reviews in the magazines. But yeah, again, it's not really that desirable. That's it for 1990. So yeah, 1991 didn't seem to be a particularly productive year for Ocean Software, because a lot of their games that year didn't get released. And the stacks around me would indicate that 1991's got a smaller stack. So yeah, there's not many games released that year. The first one I'm going to show you went straight to budget. And that's Head Over Heels, which was an 8-bit classic, a game I've never played. I am ashamed to say, kind of in that sort of pseudo 3D environment, which was very popular in the mid 80s. Again, it comes up quite frequently and doesn't really fetch a lot of money. Next up is a game which is really desirable, a game that's highly collectible. It's actually a fantastic arcade conversion, and it's done again by Ocean France, the guys at the Nipple Factory, because yet again they put a sneaky nipple in this game. If you ever watched the introduction for this against the introduction for the arcade, you'll know exactly what I mean. But it's a very good game and a very good arcade conversion, and highly sought after. I think that one now fetches about 40 quid. And from an excellent game to one I don't really know much about, and that's Wild Wheels. Not sure if it's an arcade conversion or what, I've got no idea. Not even quite sure what kind of genre of racer this actually is, but again, don't come up very often, but No one's really that interested in it, to be honest. It's like quite a vague year, 1991, doesn't it? It's kind of almost like the end of the 8 bits. Navy Seals, rock hard game, a bit like any other system that it's released on, quite similar to Robocop 2 in the fact that it is brutally hard. I can't get off level 1. It's a run and gun game, but I can only just about get over a couple of crates without getting killed. But yeah, again, quite sought after, quite collectible, don't come up very often, maybe about 20 quid. Similar to the next one really, which is Elf, which is an Ocean Software original release. Again, I don't know much about this one. Seems like a bit of an arcade adventure game, it's got some nice graphics and a nice title tune. Again, I know very little about it. Same with the next one, which is a movie tie-in. Again, this is one of the most difficult Ocean games to get. Well, for me it was anyway. Then I got this one and about 2 or 3 of them popped up. That's Darkman. Now, I'm not really sure who Darkman is. I know a film was made on his behalf, I guess, but I'm not sure if he's like a comic book hero or what. Again, never played it. Never ever put it on and played it. So I've got no idea what it plays like. But again, sought after, quite hard to get. Now the next one is yet another film tie-in. I don't think it got particularly great reviews, the film or the game. I don't think. And that's Hudson Hawk. Again, not really collectible, unless it's got his baseball cap in it, and even then it doesn't go for a lot of money, maybe 20 quid. But again, a game I've never really played. Like I said, 1991, I didn't really have a home computer to play. I was literally getting used to the Mega Drive by that point. Now, amazingly, the next one's another film tie-in. Probably one of my favourite films of the time, really. And that's Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Never really played it. Couldn't really get past the initial stage where you're kind of fighting the T-1000 or whatever it's called. Again, comes with a t-shirt. Maybe 10 quid if you're lucky for that. So not particularly, again, sought after game. Right, next up is WWF WrestleMania. Now, I don't think I've got the video. No, I haven't. So this game, you could either get the video on VHS in there, or you could get, I think, some pin badges with each of them characters. So I'm pretty sure I've got that on the Amstrad. But on the Amiga, you could either get the video or the little pin badges. So yeah, just make sure you keep an eye out for those. But again, never played it, never been interested in wrestling. My brother was quite a big fan of it back in the day. But for me personally, it wouldn't have been the sort of game I bought. And again, probably fetch about 5 or 10 quid if you're lucky. Now, classic cartoon is The Simpsons, Bart versus the Space Mutants. Again, something I never really played. But yeah, I think this was released on multiple systems, including the home consoles. I think this particular copy comes with a height chart, which I'm not going to unfold, but yeah, it was a decent game. I'm not sure what kind of reviews it got, because like I said, back then I didn't kind of had a bit of a void in my gaming history, I suppose. And the next one is a decent arcade conversion, minus the giant free poster, and that's Smash TV. Again, never played the arcade, never played the game. This was the last, no it wasn't, it's the second to last Ocean Software game I picked up. I got this just before I got Space Gun, but again, never played it. I think it's cost me about 10 quid, if that. Now, the last game in 1991, well, it didn't actually get released, but I did end up getting the box, because it's one of those games that's not marked up as missing in action, but at the same time, it's never shown up. But it did get a release apparently in Germany, and did get a release in Italy under different publisher names, but it's one of those flipping itches I just could not scratch, so I had to get hold of it, and that's Billy the Kid. Quite strange, like I said, the box is a bit damaged. This fetched me in the end about 200 quid. But it comes with a store sticker. You don't normally get those security tags unless it's in a shop, so I'm not quite sure what the hell went on with this. Now inside the box you get the manual, but the discs are blank discs. Looks like ADF files have been put onto the disc. So again, it's supposed to never have been released, but I thought I'd show you that, but it should have been released in 1991. So a nice bit of history there. That's it. So 1992 then was quite a prolific year for Ocean Software. They released loads of games. They also had a new partnership, and that was with Maxis, who brought us games like SimCity. It's also the year I bought my first Amiga. So I bought an Amiga off a friend in sort of May 1992. Unfortunately, it didn't work very well. And I bought myself a 600 in about August time. So half these games I would not have remembered because I didn't buy the magazines until I got my Amiga 600 anyway. But some of these games I actually bought. So I had a bit of an 18-month sort of, well, period away from home computer games where I had my Mega Drive. So one of the first games I bought myself when I got back an Amiga or a computer of some description was Robocop 3, which is a very good game based on a really poor movie. What was great about this game, it's all in 3D. The driving sequence at the beginning, going to the buildings, going to the church and that. It's a really kind of early first person game. I really enjoyed it, to be honest. Great fun. Again, a lot of these games in 1992 are not desirable and they're bloody common. So if you fancy any of them, they're quite cheap to pick up. This next one was the last officially released game that I bought from Ocean Software for the Amiga, and that's Space Gun, which is based on the arcade Taito arcade cabinet of the same name. Game very similar to Operation Wolf, Operation Thunderbolt, just set in a space environment with lots of aliens. I thought it was okay. I've only ever played it on the Commodore 64 cartridge, but never played it on the Amiga. Next up is another digital image design game, a bit like Robocop and F-29 Retaliator, and that's Epic, which had epic graphics, introduction sequence and music. The game itself was found wanting, unfortunately. Again, while I did buy from my Amiga, I was really impressed with it. I just didn't spend a lot of time playing it. I got a bit bored quite quickly, to be honest. Right, next one is a film tie-in. I remember watching this film. It wasn't too bad. The Addams Family. Again, not really played the game though. It does look quite pretty. It's got some really good reviews, but I've never played it, to be honest. I've got no idea what that will fetch on eBay because I haven't seen one of those listed for quite some time. Right, next up is probably the most desirable game from 1992, and that's Parasol Stars, which was the sequel to Rainbow Islands. Unofficial sequels. I don't think this game got an arcade release. And it came out roughly the same time Ocean were about to release Liquid Kids, I think. And they're quite similar games. I'm not sure if this stopped it being released. Again, never really played it. They can probably fetch about £30 or £40 nowadays. Right, next is Cool World. Again, not really sure what this is based on. Is it a film, cartoon or what? But yeah, this would have been an Ocean France game. It would have been a bloody porno probably. But anyway, not sure what it's all about. Never played it. Doesn't come up very often either. Now this game I remember as being part of the weird, wicked, whatever pack it was called, the A600 pack. Pushover. It came free as part of the pack, didn't it? Along with Microprose Grand Prix. I can't remember what else was on that pack. No, a putty, wasn't it? A putty game. But yeah, based on Domino Rally. So not a bad game. Again, never really played it. Just watched someone else play it. It looked pretty good. Doesn't come up that often either. Another film tie-in, and that's Lethal Weapon. Amazing films. Again, a game I've not really played before. Again, another £5 game. A lot of these games are dirt cheap. A sequel to Whiz Boys, Whiz Kid. Yeah, again, a game I've not actually played before. Looks alright. Not sure what kind of reception it got, to be honest. Now the next game doesn't appeal to me at all. It's the Games España 92. One of those new fandangled sleeves. But yeah, not sure what kind of reception it's got either. Doesn't come up very often. And I don't think people usually put a bid on it, even if it comes up for like a quid or two. But a second WWF game released by Ocean Software on the Amiga, and that's European Rampage. I don't ever remember this one coming out with any gifts inside the box, unlike the first game. Yeah. Again, not really played it. Hook. Doesn't come up very often. Again, based on the film. Yeah. Not much to tell you about that one either. Doesn't come up very often either. Right, the next 4 games are all with in collaboration with Maxis. 2 of them I bought, unbelievably. 2 of them I ain't got a flipping clue what they're even about. First one is the game I did buy and I did play for hundreds and hundreds of flipping hours. That's A-Train. I absolutely love this game. I missed out on SimCity. I didn't buy it. Wasn't really interested in it. This was absolutely amazing. Well, if you like that sort of game. If you don't, it'd probably be the worst game on the planet. But believe you me, it's not the worst game on the planet. That game is actually based on running the planet. And that game is called Sim Earth. And I actually bought this game. Why oh why? I've got no idea. It's not Donald Trump then. But yeah. There she is. I remember going to WH Smith's and buying that, taking it home, put it on. I thought, what the hell have I done? It's one of those games where you've got one disc which is low resolution and one disc which is high resolution, which is ideal if you've got a monitor. Exactly the same with A-Train. But yeah, literally you take the planet through its inception as a ball of fire to its death. I got to the ball of fire bit and turned it off. Next two I didn't buy, thankfully. Got no idea what they're about. That's RoboSport. Even the graphics on the back give me no indication of what this game's actually about. Again, quite obscure, don't come up very often. But don't expect to get any money for it anyway. And the same with SimAnt. You thought nowadays was full of simulation games that are flipping crap. They existed 25 years ago as well. Imagine that, simulating an ant. You can see it burrowing under the garden there, look. Look at that. Looks like fun, doesn't it? But yeah, all those 4-axis games will weigh a ton as well. So if you're ever going to buy them via auction or whatever, the postage cost will cost a bomb if you're sending them abroad. So that's it for 1992. Let's move on. So as we enter 1993 then, you notice that Amiga games being released by major publishing houses started to diminish. So I've noticed that straight away with my stack for 1993. It's probably about 2/3 the height of 1992. Not many great games came out by Ocean Software this year. Obviously you had the release of the A1200, so now Ocean were making A1200 specific titles. And the CD32 is due to be released sometime like August, September of this year. And obviously Ocean supported that as well. So I've tried to base the years these games were released on Hall of Light's database, but obviously the 1200 version of the game normally came out about 6 months later, and a bit later on again was the CD32, so they may not be in any exact sequence. So the first game I got for 1993 was a game based on a film that I think everyone couldn't wait to see, and that was Jurassic Park. CA 1200 version, again, quite common with the old sleeves. I remember buying this one back in the day. I wasn't overly impressed with it, but I did get to a 3D level, which looked a bit like a first-person shooter, and it's bloody awesome, being chased around the place by dinosaurs. It looked fantastic, and it was exclusive to the A1200 version as well. So those of you who had an standard Amiga at the time missed out on that. But the next game has got 4 variants, including the original variant. One of the variants I can't find. I've only ever seen it once, and it went for a lot more money than I anticipated. I think I put a £50 bid in for this game and got beat, but you'd never think these sorts of games would go for 50 quid. So that's European Champions. So the variant I was after was the Italian variant, and I completely missed out on it, and I've never seen a copy since. So that's European Champions, again, common as muck, dirt cheap, not a bad game actually. Features in my top 5 top-down football games for the Commodore Amiga. So its first variant, which is the more common variant, is the German variant, which is Lothar Matthäus. I just noticed that Germany are drawing 0-0 with South Korea in the 2018 World Cup. That coincided quite nicely. Olympique Marseille is the French variant. Again, I've seen this 2 or 3 times now, so it's not as hard to get as I initially thought. The differences between the games is literally just a sleeve and the instruction manual. Everything else, apart from the loading screen, it's exactly the same. So yeah, really pleased to have those, but I'd love to have that last one just to finish off that sort of variant collection really. Now, the next game I never played, but I do remember the old curly dude from Quavers, One Step Beyond. Not quite sure what it's all about, I just remember it's got a really good cartoon introduction sequence. Now none of these games are particularly expensive. Lucky if most of them fetch about 10 quid to be honest. The only one that might be a bit difficult to get is a French variant of European soccer or European football. Now I've got another game called Burning Rubber. Now, I'm not sure if there's an A1200 version of this. If there is, I'd like it. Bit of a racer. Ocean didn't do that many racing games. But yeah, never really played it for any amount of time to be honest. But it looks alright. Not quite a sort of Lotus Beta really, is it? Right, next up I got a game you've already seen in the previous year, and that's A-Train. This is the construction set. Now, Ocean did release a double pack with this and A-Train together in a completely different box again. I have got it somewhere, just can't find it. Right, the next 4 games are all CD32 games. So what I was trying to explain earlier, Sleepwalker came out in 1992, but obviously came out later on a CD32. Again, very similar to the original version, or the A1200 version. I don't really think there's too much difference in it, to be honest. Maybe the music. I think the music's the only difference. This is quite difficult to get. It'll probably fetch you about 50 quid. Yeah, that's the CD32 version. Next up is Ryder Cup. So this game was the sequel to International Open Golf. International Open Golf was taken off the shelves because it received poor reviews and probably didn't sell particularly well as a result. And this is the follow-up to it, which came out about a year later and was supposed to be better, got better reviews, so Ocean stuck with this one. Again, doesn't come up that often, but it doesn't really fetch too much either. Right, next game, second to last game for 1993 is Dennis. Again, quite a difficult one to get, doesn't come up that often. I'm pretty sure it's an A1200 and a standard version as well. That could fetch anything between 50 and 100 quid. Quite an obscure title. And the next one is probably the rarest item I got in the whole Ocean collection. Well, about as rare as Billy the Kid, I suppose. That's International Open Golf on a CD32. Game I picked up a few months ago. Cost an arm and a leg. I've never seen one complete before. But yeah, probably the pride and joy in the whole Ocean collection, to be honest. That's it for 1993. Right, so we've finally reached the final part. So what I've done is I've grouped the last 4 years together because there's not many games left to go through. In fact, 1997 just has one release. So yeah, a bit sad really, isn't it? But we'll go for it anyway. So first up, there's again another CD32 game, and that's PGA European Tour, which is obviously released by Electronic Arts on a Mega Drive. But yeah, I've never really played any golf games except for Nick Faldo, which I completely enjoyed, to be honest. Next up is quite a difficult game to get on a CD32, and that's Kid Chaos. Again, this will fetch between 50 and 100 pounds. The floppy disk version goes for a hell of a lot less, to be honest. Never really played it. Very fast platformer from what I remember, kind of inspired by Sonic in terms of its speed. A game I've never bothered to play. This is still sealed actually, that's Shaq Fu. Again, no desire to play that. I think it's just a fighting game. Again, very late release. Again, that kind of Ocean Software and EA collaboration. Straight away there's 2 games there already. Ah, there's a third one. Again, CD32 based. Jungle Strike. Sequel to Desert Strike. I never played this one, but I absolutely loved Desert Strike. Again, this one's quite uncommon. Didn't used to go for a lot of money, about 20 quid maybe. Next one's quite obscure, quite desirable, and that's Mr. Nuts. Never played it either. Got it on the Mega Drive, which I think is a completely different version to the Amiga one. Probably fetch about 20 to 30 pound nowadays, that one. So I think that's 1994. So 1995. Now this game was quite inspirational. I thought it was an absolutely fantastic game. Obviously we didn't have Doom on our Amigas, but we did have Alien Breed 3D, which I actually did complete, and I played it a hell of a lot. It's one of the first games I ever linked up 2 Amigas and played with a friend, and it was absolutely fantastic, to be honest. Again, Alien Breed 3D is fetching more and more all the time at the moment on the CD32. It's probably gone past the £100 barrier at the minute. Next up is another CD32 iteration. Worms again came out on the standard Amiga, as far as I know. I had this on the PlayStation. It's very good conversion, and it's the original version of it. Again, very common. It's not that uncommon on the CD32, but it's quite common generally. And next up was, in fact, one of the last games I ever bought. In fact, the next 2 are the last 2 games I ever bought on my Amiga, which is quite sad, really. That's the Spurious Legacy. I had the 1200 version back in 1996, maybe 97. I think it was 96. Again, didn't play it. Very similar sort of style to Zelda. just didn't get very good reviews. That could probably fetch you the CD32 version of 150 quid now to £200, maybe even more. Box standard Amiga version, which you can install onto your hard drive anyway, probably fetch you about 10 quid. The next one is the Killing Grounds or Alien Breed 3D2. Now my Amiga 1200, which was accelerated back in the day, this kind of chugged along. It wasn't particularly fast, but did look really good. But you needed something quite special to get the most out of it, to be honest. But again, this is not overly valuable, 10 quid to pick that up. It only ever come out in the AGA system. It did come out in the CD32. It obviously didn't come out on a standard Amiga. But last but not least, the last game Ocean released, again in conjunction with Team 17. It's Worms, the Director's Cut. A very popular franchise, Worms. Not quite as popular as a Robocop franchise, but weren't far behind. Again, this is an AGA only game. It didn't come out in the CD32, it did come out on standard machines. Not really played it, but it does look fantastic. But that's it. That is all we have. That is Ocean Software on the Amiga. Let's just conclude. So, just to summarise then, and I nearly forgot, I didn't show you the Imagine games. So there's not many. I don't think Ocean or Imagine released many games under the Imagine label. I think there's only about half a dozen. So I'll show you those quickly before concluding. Most of these are really difficult to get hold of and do not come up very often at all. Probably the most common game is Dragon Ninja, or Bad Dudes versus Dragon Ninja. Again, comes up once in a while. Probably cost about 10-15 quid, to be honest. It's not a very good arcade conversion, but probably one of the better ones for the time. I had this on the Spectrum back in the day. Next up is Arkanoid Revenge of Doe. Again, another difficult game to get on the Amiga. This one it cost me about 40 quid about 6 months ago, but again, the prequel Arkanoid only came out in the ST, didn't come out in the Amiga. Next up is the only way you can buy Navy moves, or sorry, Army moves, get that right, on the Amiga, and that is through CU Amiga magazine. So they gave away the full game in their magazine. Again, came out on the Atari ST. Next up is a game I was quite lucky to get. Well, I got it from Germany for about 35 quid, I think. And that's Victory Road, and that's still sealed. And that's one of the most brutal games to flip and find. So I was really chuffed to get hold of that. Again, the Spectrum version, people are asking 75 quid for, because it's that uncommon. So really pleased to have it. Unfortunately, I'm not going to open it and play it, to be honest, because it's not a great game, is it? I think it's got something to do with the Akari Warriors series. And finally, another really difficult game to get hold of is Renegade. A lot of people probably didn't realise Renegade got a release on the 16-bit machines. But again, a very difficult title to get hold of. It's more like the arcade than the other versions, but it's not very good, to be honest. I didn't really like playing it whatsoever. So I'd like to say thank you to Minx36, as he's offered me his services and trying to help me track down some of these 8-bit Ocean games or Imagine games. Because what I'd like to do is a video for all my 8-bit Ocean games. Obviously, I haven't quite completed a full set, because the idea was to have a game, doesn't matter what system it's on, as long as I've got the game, as part of my Ocean collection. So for example, Rambo, if I've got Rambo on a Spectrum, I don't really need it on anything else. But I just want to have one type of each game. From Spectrum games right through to the very last machines the games got released on. My voice is going. So yeah, thank you Minx36 for that. That would be great. But as far as the Amiga's concerned, I'm really pleased that it's finally done. Well, as far as I know anyway. Just found out another unreleased Amiga title as well called Teddy Boy. I've got no idea what the hell Teddy Boy even is. So I'm going to research that one right now because, well, I missed that from my 11 unreleased Amiga Ocean game video. So, never mind. But yeah, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching and sticking by this video. But I just wanted to get a comprehensive Amiga Ocean software video together for a bit of future reference for myself, really. But anyone out there who wants to embark on that same journey, it's some bloody journey in terms of collecting terms. You think Ocean Software, their games would be so common, but actually a lot of them are flipping hard to find. Especially like the likes of International Open Golf. I was absolutely lucky as hell to find that. Even that cost an arm and a leg. So that's it. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for subscribing. Please share the video. And I'll see you again real soon. So take care of yourselves and bye for now.